Welcome back to the Lanterne Rouge YouTube channel and to highlights of a crazy Paris-Nice Stage 8. It was a revised course because they couldn't finish in Nice. 93 kilometers, only just over 2 hours of racing. How hard could it be? Doing 2.5 laps of an undulating but technical course with a shallow climb of 4Ks, 4.5%. It looked pleasant and tranquil, but the race was anything but for race leader Primož Roglič, 52 seconds ahead of Max Schachmann on GC. And before there were live images, we saw on the race radio that Schachmann had had a mechanical 7Ks into the stage, and then about 20 minutes later that Primož Roglič had crashed 20Ks into the stage just after Godou had crashed, but Roglič was able to be paced back into the race a few kilometers later without too much trouble by his teammates Bennett, Kruijswijk and I think Jos van Emden. Schachmann said in an interview, which you'll hear later, that the peloton all waited up for Roglič to catch back on after that first crash, but you can see how banged up Roglič was. Apparently he dislocated his left shoulder in that initial crash, must have fallen very heavily on his left side. With 30 Ks into the stage, there still wasn't a breakaway, and finally de Klerk, Bistrom, turns on Trek, and Jonas Rouge attacked some of the big engines, trying to form a breakaway. Other riders started to slip off the front, trying to get into that break, like Luis Leon Sanchez from Astana. And they had about a 1-minute lead with 36 Ks to go after the second lap at the top of the day's climb. They went past the finish line twice, and then they had this quick technical descent, which is apparently the same descent they used in the Tour de France Stage 1 last year in Nice when there were all those crashes in the wet conditions. And we didn't have live images of the front of the peloton on that descent, but suddenly, with 24.5 Ks to go, we saw Primož Roglič in a second group trying to chase back onto the peloton about 3 to 4 seconds ahead of him. And the question you might be asking is, where are his teammates? Well, they were in the group in front of him, at least that might be Kruijswijk or Oomen, I'm not sure which. And for sure the race radio was unclear about what had happened to Roglič on that descent, and maybe their team radio wasn't working too well either, but this was absolutely strung out on this false flat uphill section, and it was some time before Roglic's teammates came back to help him. We later found out that Roglič had crashed in the last corner of that descent. I'd recommend you read the Flamme Rouge thread about what might have happened on that descent. But what we do know for sure is that Roglič was pacing on the front on his own, agonizingly close to the back of safety, and it was a couple of minutes before his teammates came back to help him. He had Kruijswijk pacing as well as Sam Oomen with 21 Ks to go. They were holding the gap stable to the peloton, but the problem for them is Schachmann had the Bora boys pacing, and then Astana started to help too. They had Vlasov third on GC, about 1:12 behind Roglič, Schachmann 52 seconds back, and on an undulating parkour like this with shallow gradient climbs, big engines like Jordi Meus I think might be second wheel, Niels Pollitt pulled a big turn for Bora Hansgrohe. They're basically pacing 5 or 7 against 2 against Kruijswijk and Oomen, who are climbing guys, compared to the strong flat engines, the names I just mentioned. Another 3 kilometers later, and Roglič is still only 5 seconds behind the peloton. But the problem is Kruijswijk is done. He's about to finish his pull. It's Buani and Danny van Poppel on Roglic's wheel. They can't really assist him that much, although they do try to help him. And with the peloton strung out single file, although this gap looks small, this is a monumental task for Roglič after crashing twice and pacing himself for some time to be able to close that on his own. And once Kruijswijk pulled off, that gap went from 5 to 10 to 25 to 40 seconds very quickly. And before we knew it, Max Schachmann was into the lead in the virtual general classification ahead of Roglič. And this road reminds me a lot of Gorge Road, which they use in the Tour Down Under in Adelaide. And we knew with even 15 Ks to go with Astana and Bora riding so hard that GC was over for Primož Roglič. With Roglič out of the equation, Astana, who had Vlasov and Joni Zagire close on GC, just 17 or 25 seconds behind Schachmann, started to try and 1-2 attack him, but unfortunately for them, this is Schachmann's terrain. He's really strong on an up and down course like this with shallow gradient climbs, particularly stronger than Vlasov, so they couldn't make any impression on Schachmann to try and overtake his lead on GC. 900 meters to go, a twisty, technical, fast run into this finish. Got riders like Laporte and Magnus Cort and Dylan Teuns in this group with a fast finish. Roglič now 2 minutes and 40 seconds behind them, still going as hard as he could, and I thought for once, why not let the stage winner commentate their own sprint finish?
Hectical last few kilometers because there was no trains to kind of keep the speed up and keep people in position. So yeah, it was really about keeping the elbows, and I kind of did a little bit of my own lead out. I've seen the finish coming around 2 times, and knew was really quick, and you had a small corner with 150 meters to go. So I thought if I was first through that corner, nobody could pass me.
Trademark win for Magnus Cort ahead of Christophe Laporte by 3/4 of a bike length. Laporte has never won a World Tour race. He's come second on 2 stages in the last 3 or 4 days at Paris-Nice, and I think he'll be ruining not moving up on Magnus Cort sooner. Laporte on paper the quicker man in the finish, but now Roglič crossed the finish line over 3 minutes after the Schachmann group, out of the top 10 on GC after one of the most dominant one-week displays up to this stage 8 that I've ever seen. And also, just like we saw on the Planche de Belfi stage last year, going over to Max Schachmann to congratulate him. Imagine the type of person you have to be so banged up, have dislocated your shoulder, have lost another stage race in such crazy circumstances after the Tour de France, and to still go and congratulate Schachmann. It really shows the type of sportsman Roglič is, and how insane the comments were criticising him for being a bad sportsman after stage 7. But let's hear from Max Schachmann now on how he felt about that Paris-Nice GC win and how the stage played out.
It was a crazy day. I'm having mixed feelings. I don't know. It feels strange because Roglič crashed, but he also crashed twice. I don't know if it was his mistake. I just can say in the beginning I had a puncture. Just before the first climb, nobody was waiting. I had to go really, really deep to go back. Then Primož crashed. We waited. It was very dangerous in the descent. Then suddenly he crashed again, but we had that strong breakaway and we were going for the victory of the day, and it was so strong. And I don't know, I don't know if I can be happy or if I'm also a bit, I don't know, it's not nice to win like that. It's really difficult.
But here's the stage results. Magnus Cort first ahead of Laporte, Latour, Turnsbergy, Van Baarle, Izagirre, Jorgensen, Lampard and Schachmann. Schachmann winning GC, 19 seconds ahead of Vlasov and 23 seconds ahead of Izagirre. The 2 Astana teammates making up second and third. Congratulations to Max Schachmann, his second Paris-Nice GC 2 years in a row. He stayed relatively close to Roglič on GC throughout the week despite Roglic's dominance, and at the end of the stage he had the strong teammates on the flat to make that difference to Primož Roglič. We spoke about that at length and the unwritten rules on the podcast last night. I have no issue with what Bora or Astana did. They don't have to wait for every single crash from a rival, particularly at the pointy end of a race, and Jumbo-Visma's director sportif Christian Ehrmann acknowledged on Twitter that Jumbo-Visma have no one else to blame but themselves. It was their mistakes. And apart from the crashes, I can only think he's referring to this moment when Roglič was pacing on the front on his own for at least 2 minutes whilst they had teammates in the group in front. If they dropped those teammates back straight away and did a max effort, I can only think they would have got Roglič back into that lead group. The next batch of highlight videos will be Catalunya coming up rapidly, where Sepp Kuss has a GC leadership opportunity for Jumbo-Visma. Watch out for my preview video for that, and I'll see you soon. Ciao.